Welcome, I'm Void Dude, and Bethesda finally gave us a more comprehensive look at Starfield's gameplay, spilling the beans on the surprising scope of their epic sci-fi RPG, which Todd Howard, if the absolute mad lad can be believed, will have ship and base building as well as over 1,000 star systems which you can land on anywhere to explore.
We can't wait to see what you find.
It's when old Toddy boy uttered these words that my hairy eyebrow shot up like a dart tossed by World Championship thrower Phil Taylor. Why? Because anyone who's paid any serious attention to the state of space games over the last 20 years would know that that statement has serious implications and potential for absolute bullshittery. He knows exactly what we'll find. He's the director and executive producer of Bethesda Game Studios, but in order for us to understand what we could find that he implies to not know but that we know that he does know, we need to directly compare Star Citizen and Starfield and decide that one is objectively better than the other and no mortal on earth is allowed to play and God forbid enjoy both games. I consider myself an expert on the topic because I replied to a beautifully sarcastic tweet by the prom king of Star Citizen community himself, and he told me, this guy gets it. Yes, State of Zero, I do get it. Let's begin. Over the last decade or so, software development techniques and the corresponding hardware developments have progressed to the point where it's more frequently achievable for game development studios to create and provide game spaces that can encompass entire solar systems and beyond. And this is great because before any of the tech code, hardware, and whatever else was available to make these games work at these crazy scales, no team of artists, no matter how huge or talented, could conceivably handcraft a planet's worth of content with a consistent level of detail, never mind an entire solar system, even if the scale were to be vastly shrunk down. And that's where the procedural generation techniques and methods of generating larger scale play spaces than ever before have come into play. I first experienced this combination of procedural content generation and vast universe scale space in an awesome not game, the Universe Simulator Space Engine, which has been playable since 2010. This universe simulation provided such a visceral way for me to experience and think about space and the incomprehensible distances between things in our universe. It quite literally blew my mind back then. I highly recommend checking it out if you have the teeniest modicum of interest in space stuff. For example, you can set your first-person game camera to travel at about the speed of light and then just pick a random direction and go. Now, knowing the fact that it takes about 8 minutes for light to travel from the sun to Earth is one thing, but experiencing it in a simulation like Space Engine really puts it into context. In the footage you've been watching this whole time, we've been traveling at the speed of light, but might as well have been standing still due to the incomprehensible scale of our universe. That was a crazy tangent. Sorry, let's get back on track. After the original announcements and Kickstarters of Star Citizen and Squadron 42 way back in 2013, it started to feel like there was going to be a modern space game revolution, as prior to this there weren't that many interesting space games since the good old days. Now, I know EVE Online existed since about 2003, and that's been an incredible experience for many. However, it was never really my cup of tea, as it lacked the true simulated action or engaging and fun flight mechanics that I and many others craved. Also, the whole spreadsheet thing just never really did it for me. But if you look into the insane stories and epic betrayals players have had in this game over the years, it's absolutely phenomenal, and I believe my life experience to be poor for not having played it for any prolonged amount of time. Elite Dangerous soon came along on the heels of its own Kickstarter campaign and became playable in 2014. It scratched the itch of many a space sim enthusiast until recently, I believe, as the developers basically committed seppuku by not being able to fulfill their original promises and making some pretty terrible decisions with their latest expansion that pissed off their entire community. All that aside though, Elite Dangerous looked like a great time. I personally never tried it out, however, because it didn't appear to offer the kind of experience I was after. It was online, but from what I understood, you couldn't really play with your friends as a wingman, for example, because the game was incredibly instanced and sharded to the point where it was basically an online economy with a single-player combat trading ship simulation attached to it. So that was my understanding back then. Please do correct me if I'm wrong. But the interesting thing about Elite Dangerous was its approach to how the game universe was created. They opted to to use their procedural generation tech to create an entire bloody galaxy worth of 400 billion star systems, apparently modeled on actual galactic charts. While immensely impressive, the problem that became apparent here is that this content was viewed by many as a mile wide but an inch deep. Yes, the scale is amazing and it's got interesting spatial traversal, but ultimately one planet or system or star or moon is the same as any other, and there were no real interesting differences in gameplay among them. This is not to say that this universe creation method is bad or wrong, it just became clear that in this new revolution of space games, we couldn't have our cake and eat it too. If you were a space game designer of the time, it felt like you had to choose between a grandiose scale with less content per light year or a smaller scale with increased detail and more content per light year, and hopefully that content would be meaningful and engaging. In 2016, we got No Man's Sky, which was probably the game responsible for turning the words procedural generation into the marketing buzzword that they had become, but tarnishing them in the process. We all know today that No Man's Sky's development story eventually became one of redemption, with the developers pulling off the comeback of the century. It's seen some crazy, incredible updates, and just seems to get more amazing content drops and patches that expand the game and keep it fresh and exciting for its player base. But before all that, No Man's Sky was yet another lesson in how procedural generation provided us with intergalactically large gameplay spaces, but with all the depth and intrigue of a drop of water in a desert. Which brings us back to where we began, with Todd Howard's terrifying words.
Over 1,000 planets, all open for you to explore. We can't wait.
Pause for dramatic effect.
To see what you find.
If we look at the examples I've mentioned before all this, the design problem with these big universe-sized games is exactly that. What stuff is there to find, and why should we care? To be clear, the stuff to find in this whole thing is meaningful content. Even without being a huge universe-sized game where things can tend to be spread pretty thinly, having a decent amount of meaningful content, especially for MMOs, seems to be a huge problem these days. Just take a look at New World or any other of the MMOs that have come out in the last 5 years. There's actually a serious content quality and quantity problem when it comes to modern gaming in general. Now I have high hopes for Starfield. Why? Because who the hell doesn't want Skyrim or Fallout in space? Bethesda's past titles are renowned for being absolutely jam-packed with engaging, meaningful content that are capable of providing ridiculous amounts of hours of entertainment, and I'm not even going to mention the modding scene. The design philosophy behind Skyrim and the way the player engages with the world is extraordinary. I challenge you to find a random YouTube playthrough of Skyrim who doesn't get instantly distracted within the first 10 minutes of leaving Helgen and completely forgetting about the fact that they're on some epic quest to kill a god dragon thing and have nothing but fun while encountering what the world has to offer. Now I know this is not unique to Skyrim or Bethesda titles, but I'm using this as the example because this is the same company making Starfield, so it all just fits together. The quality content per meter explored and minutes spent in Skyrim is arguably near perfect. A really well placed, non-boring amount of terrain traversal and exploration takes place until the player is pretty much guaranteed to stumble upon something interesting. That something interesting is 99% of the time some form of meaningful content. Meaningful because the seemingly random encounter you've just had will force you to use the game's systems. You will need to make a choice to combat the encounter, flee from the encounter, or talk to the encounter and make some kind of a decision that will in turn provide even more meaningful content. All the while, these experiences are using the game's character attribute systems that will gain you power as you use them. Great design, great game. So we've identified the problem with procedural generation, and we've highlighted an example of what makes a game's content meaningful and engaging for players. So if these two elements can be combined with the right design philosophies, the right amount of handcraftedness, and the perfect utilization of procedural generation, we might truly have something new and unique and incredible on our hands. And today I believe that Star Citizen and Starfield are the two perfect candidates to pull this type of game off. If Bethesda can carry the Skyrim formula they've mastered over into Starfield's vastness of space, solar systems, planets, moons, and space stations, and combine it with procedural generation in a way that perpetuates meaningful content encounters, I really believe we are in for a hell of a treat. And there is a similar kind of design mentality we've seen with Star Citizen, with the behind-the-scenes quantum simulation. If this tool correctly controls the pace at which you experience interesting and meaningful content in Star Citizen, we're in for a hell of a double treat. Right, so where does that leave us? The internet basically exploded with comparisons between Star Citizen and Starfield when the trailers were released, and how one is better than the other, and how after 9,000 years Star Citizen is still in development and Starfield will swoop in and do everything that Star Citizen does but better, and was designed and coded in 3 minutes and 18 seconds by comparison. Nothing needs to come along and kill Star Citizen, the same way nothing needed to come along and kill World of Warcraft. Killing things for no reason is the mentality of a psychopath. You shouldn't care as much as you do if Starfield accomplishes some technical gaming achievement before Squadron 42 or Star Citizen, because we should simply be celebrating the fact that these types of technical milestones are being achieved in the first place. And you'll just end up sounding like this guy.
Star Citizen gonna be pissed! What is this? No!
But point, dude! Star Citizen really is taking way too long to develop. Something has to give eventually, right? Nope, I don't care. I would literally give zero if Star Citizen took another 10 years to develop, if it would make for a better game. I would happily have waited another 10 years for Cyberpunk 2077 to release if it meant we could be one line of code closer to the original marketing representation of that game instead of what we ended up getting. Who cares if Starfield doesn't have atmospheric flight when approaching a planet like Star Citizen? Who cares if Star Citizen doesn't have the same type of ship customization as Starfield? The funny thing here is that Starfield might actually funnel more people towards a game like Star Citizen, because once you've seen all that Starfield has to offer, you might think, man, this would be so cool to do with friends or in a guild in a multiplayer setting. My biggest wish for Starfield is that it gets some form of multiplayer one day, as most of its features just seem to warrant an online component of some kind, perhaps in a future DLC or something. The point I've been trying to make here is that these new types of space games coming out with all these incredibly vast play spaces have been a huge technical challenge for developers over the last 20 years, and I believe in the next 5 years we will see the fruits of many laborious endeavors, except for this horse shit. Stay the f*** away. I hope that over the next decade we all have a tremendous amount of epic and entertaining space games, and I want to enjoy all of them, provided they have meaningful bloody content. Let's look forward to these games together, and if one is not your cup of tea, you don't need to pretend you're the Terminator and the game in question is John Connor. Thank you so much for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more. I've been Void Dude, and I'll see you around the verse. Cheers.